Hello, this is Clarence Moye with Awards Daily here with Laurence Bennett, the production designer of Paramount Plus's The Offer. Laurence, very nice to meet you.
Good afternoon. Good to see you.
So, The Offer essentially is the retelling of the making of the Oscar-winning classic, The Godfather. And this limited series has a complexity because it essentially takes place in the 60s and the 70s, but there's also that recreation of the 1940s aspect where
Right,
they're
right.
obviously it's a meta thing. It's a film crew, working in 60s, 70s Hollywood, but also creating a 1940s era for The Godfather. Talk to me about sort of creating that sequence first, or those sequences of The Godfather within The Offer. I want to start with that first.
Well, that was the tender area. That was what we felt a, an additional responsibility to, and trying to do period New York,
Mhm.
whether it's 40s, 60s, 70s in Los Angeles is a challenge. Just doing period Los Angeles in Los Angeles is a challenge these days because the city has been so unkind to its history and architecture. But between some fragments of downtown Los Angeles and some other bits and pieces, plus the backlots, we developed a stock of blocks of New York blocks that we could, with augmentation from the VFX, expand a little bit. Um, because we were not actually doing any scenes from the picture, but just doing material in and around the filming of those scenes. It was all off camera. Um, it made it a little easier, but we did need to execute the specific scenery for each of those sequences. Yeah, which was which was tricky.
I bet. So you talked about the backlots. When you are navigating in the 60s and 70s sequences, and Matthew Good as Robert Evans is walking out of an office. You've got Al, played by Miles Teller. Juno Temple as Betty, walking all around, navigating through all this backlots. Are those actual backlots in Hollywood, or are those recreations?
Those backlots are reused backlot New York streets at Universal, Warner Brothers, and Paramount,
Okay.
and did a lot of physical changes to them: signage, dressing,
Hmm.
lighting, practical effects, and also then because the backlots are only a couple of blocks long,
Right.
at the most, if you're looking down the street, you need to extend it. So set extensions and removal out in the world when we were shooting locations out in the world. The removal of our change to anachronisms was all taken care of by VFX. And I think a really good example of that is the scene when they were doing the Christmas Eve shopping outside Best and Company.
Yes.
Um, we could really only affect with the time available up to a certain height on the buildings. So we did the physical conversion to Best and Co, the displays and the canopies and the candy canes, and then VFX took it above that. And because there was a high wide, they also extended Fifth Avenue up past, put in St. Patrick's Cathedral and extended the street. Really did a beautiful job, I think.
Does that, so when you're talking about the VFX extending the logistics of the physical sets, do
Expanding
you,
the view,
right, expanding the view, do you get involved with the VFX team to make sure that it adheres
totally,
to your, yeah, okay.
totally. The In this instance, the VFX supervisor John Manja his office was in my department,
Mhm.
and he came on very early in prep. Was there every day through all the filming. We kept in touch afterwards, but every sequence was discussed at great length what we might need and how we should best address it. And how to keep it economical as well, because obviously time and money were a concern
Right.
in post. Um, but yeah, Best and Co. I was looking at comps of that right after we filmed it, and then just got the finished sequence, literally a couple of weeks ago.
It's funny how the advent of VFX and computer technology has changed slightly the production designer's responsibilities. Now you're all of a sudden encompassing a whole new world of things that, historical
Yeah.
production designers never had to deal with.
Well, they needed to deal with the background, but
Yeah,
in
the
other
max.
ways.
Yeah.
This is a kind of um, a different tool that allows us to do. We could never have taken on some of the things we did the scope of some of them in exteriors without the effects.
Mhm.
So it was a great collaboration.
I do have to ask, when there's a subplot in the series about the house that is used to film the opening wedding sequence of The Godfather,
Right.
of Connie's
The
wedding.
Curling House, the
Um,
Longfellow Avenue house.
is that the actual house? Were you
It's
able to
on
film at the
Longfellow.
same?
It's on Longfellow Avenue in Staten Island.
Okay, so were you able to film at the same
The
house?
actual location house. No, of course not.
Of course not. So you had to
No,
recreate it.
everything we filmed, with the exception of a couple bits of driving unit in Sicily, everything was done in the Los Angeles zone.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was a significant challenge. No, we found after a lot of looking, Bud Wilson, our location manager, managed to find a house that was hidden away in the hills east of Los Angeles that had that had it wasn't a dead architectural match to the Longfellow Avenue house, but it had the feeling of that same the same Tudor, mock Tudor style, a little bit of brick and some wood.
Wow, that's fascinating. I wonder how a locations manager goes and finds a house like that. Like, how do you put an ad out there that says, "Do you have a house that looks like the Godfather house?"
Well, Boyd has 30 years of scouring all over the city, and he's as painfully as aware as I of what's no longer there in the city.
Right.
Because the New York like exteriors were much more abundant back when we started.
Hmm.
But his knowledge of residential areas all over, within a 30-40 mile range is pretty remarkable.
So you talked about Sicily, those exterior shots, Los Angeles or Sicily, or I'm assuming,
With the
the crew had.
exception of the aerial views of them driving and then driving into the town, everything was done in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles zone. So we built the Castello where they did the car explosion. We built the bar where Barvatelli, where Michael met Apollonia.
How long does that take you to do something like that? How long did you work on this project in total? Because there's a lot of things that you had to build. I mean, I made an assumption that you were filming on location in some spots, which you really weren't. You were in Los Angeles. You had to recreate those.
Yeah, we had always planned to go to Sicily, but it was at a particular point in one of the COVID swells, that it just wasn't practical to take all the principles and move. And also, we would actually have had to build it there because the locations in Sicily have changed so much in the past few years. I was on the offer for 9 months.
Oh,
yeah,
that's a very busy 9 months.
Big chunk of my life. It was a lot of fun, but it was I kept busy.
I want to talk a little bit about the color palettes between New York and LA. Obviously, LA is very sunny, lots of maybe not amber hues, but sort of yellow hues.
The light is warmer. It's Mediterranean light.
Yeah, and then New York is severe, stark edges, stark dark,
colder light.
Those are intentional, I would assume, color palettes used in both sequences.
Yeah, and that's that was worked out with the first DP, Saltatino. He was really involved with me in prep and figuring out how we differentiate those roles and what sort of characteristics they have. He actually handled the camera differently between the West and East Coast sequences. Okay. I'll let him address that, but in terms of color and texture and things, as long as I could stay as true as possible to the colors and textures of 1970s Los Angeles and New York, that was a good start. It was differentiating within other things like the different social clubs. The basis for the mob.
What about the Gulf and Western offices? Where did you get the look and feel for those sequences?
Those offices were done at an old oil company building in downtown Los Angeles. This has been used for filming a lot in the last 20 years. And the building actually was built in the same era as the Gulf and Western building. So it was sort of a West Coast analog of the GW building.
Excellent. I want to pop back originally to a question that I left out of the Godfather sequences. There's another subplot about the horse's head. You know, initially you've got the paper mache looking thing, the very rudimentary representation, and then all of a sudden there's a mysterious real horse's head that pops up.
Right.
How did you make that look so realistic? I assume that is not a real horse's head.
It was not a real horse's head. The property department did a great job of it. They really did. I mean, that apocryphal story of the horse's head, I mean, I've heard in all sorts of versions over the years, but most of the versions of the story do underscore the fact that yes, they used a real horse's head.
Yeah.
And they got it from an abattoir someplace, but
wow.
Yeah.
Looking back over these 10 episodes of The Offer, the 9 months that you spent on this series, what would you say are the most challenging sequences that you had to design for?
Most challenging. I think all of the New York exteriors as a whole are tough because, you know, I'm pretty familiar with New York. I've worked a lot there. Mm-hmm. And I certainly didn't want to have any embarrassing glaring errors, or, you know, there were period issues, and, you know, we were in all kinds of neighborhoods all over Manhattan, and bits of Brooklyn and Staten Island. The biggest thing in the end was the sheer volume of scenery, because we built or dressed or shot on location somewhere between 150 and 175 sets.
Wow.
That's a big chunk of scenery.
Yeah.
It's just the workflow of keeping that all in motion and handling it, you know, as it comes up. Fortunately, falls to my art director. Jan Engel did a phenomenal job with that, just the organization going on behind the scenes to keep all that stuff moving. And then, you know, when you've got COVID issues and frequent unexpected schedule changes, you know, like any picture, there were schedule changes and changes of location for a variety of reasons. Every picture has its own behind the scenes stories of problems and things that needed to be gotten through. And this is just an example of one of the most extreme and best known. But I think in a way it's a celebration of the messiness of, you know, of filmmaking and the persistence and dedication of people who do it.
Absolutely. So my last question for you deals with another set that is not seen until, I believe, the last episode, maybe in the 9th episode. I think it's the 10th. Yeah. Matthew Good actually talked about this. When I asked him what his favorite scene that he filmed over the entire series was, he mentions the premiere of The Godfather, because he has an emotional attachment to that sequence, because that was one of the only times where the entire cast was really together because of COVID, you know, because they had been kept in isolation so much, or they were filming in isolation so much, and now there was a good number of people there on set to replicate that experience. How did you create that theater? How did you create that vibe so beautifully? Because it just feels like an old classic Hollywood theater house.
It was a classic. It's the Los Angeles Theater on Broadway in downtown Los Angeles. It's one of the gems. It's actually where in 31, where Chaplin premiered City Lights.
Oh, wow. It's
long been one of my favorite theater interiors. We did the research on the actual premiere. It was at the Lowe's town. I think it was a duplex. It was a two-screen house at that time. Mm-hmm. So it must have been a very early split of an old cinema. But when you look at the archival photographs from the premiere, it was a little splashy. I mean, they papered the entire facade with Godfather imagery. We just tried to stay as close to that as we could, and where we had to vary from it architecturally or because of the constraints of time and the amount of space we have on the street, we just tried to capture the spirit of it. Like so many other things where we couldn't use an actual location, so we had to just try to get to the feeling of it. But that was a big splashy experience.
Yeah, I mean, you did so beautifully. It's a fantastic sequence. It's a great moment in the series of a lot of great moments. But Laurence, thank you so much for the time today. Really great work. Loved the visuals. I felt like I was there. I'm still kind of reeling with the fact that you had to recreate all that in 9 months, and you really weren't filming very many times on location. So kudos to you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Good talking to you, Clarence.
Good to talk to you too. Bye.